Hello, everybody. Welcome to Outdoor Cats. Today is Thursday, December 12th, and boy, what a week. What a week for Worcester. This has been a banner week. Chris, how are you feeling about it?
Did something happen this week?
Oh shit! We probably should have talked about this before we got on the show, huh?
I don't know. I didn't hear about anything that happened to or in the city. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. Obviously, I'm doing okay this week. I am a little tired, which I don't understand because I'm not fucking doing anything really. But yeah, otherwise I'm fine.
That'll make you more tired sometimes.
Probably.
Yeah. I have been engaged in sumo wrestling with my internet modem and Spectrum Communications this entire week. This, of all weeks, is the week that my internet picks to go down. My entire workflow has just been upside down for 3-4 days now, and I want to redacted the redacted of redacted right now.
Yeah, that's
in broad that's redacted. But we got stuff to talk about. Man, do we have stuff to talk about. We have to talk about this Department of Justice investigation report into the Worcester Police Department. And there's so much to talk about. We've been waiting for this document for 2 years.
A long time. Yeah.
It's here. Everyone is reacting like little piss babies. The reactions have been insane so far, which we're going to get to. But we shouldn't skip right over the contents of the report and talk about the political drama because, the contents of this report, especially the sex abuse allegations, just really need to stay the focus. And there's just going to be so much. There's going to be so much of a concerted effort over the next couple weeks, couple months to refocus this away from that. But I really think that we need to sort of stick to our guns and not let the towny political bullshit get in the way of the fact that this is a document from the federal government detailing horrible sex crimes committed against some of our most vulnerable residents.
Yeah, it's pretty fucking gnarly. There's really no other way to put it. And I think I just wanted to stop you there quickly for a second and actually say overtly, I think probably most people listening to this have some idea of what we're talking about. But if you don't, and if you haven't seen this report and you don't know what's going on, here is your trigger warning that we are going to be discussing what the report discusses, which includes sexual violence and assault, police violence and brutality, and some pretty heinous shit. So, be forewarned.
Right. And I like that you added that because I don't think that the really difficult part about talking about this is how to not shy away from the stuff that needs to be said out loud, but say it in a way that's you're not going out of your way to cause harm to anybody by talking about it. So it's just it is really something. We should start, I suppose, with sort of a summary of what's in the report. It's a 41-page document from the Department of Justice. It was released on Monday around 1 p.m., which is an important thing to remember as we...
Yeah, remember that date and time.
Remember that date and time as we get to sort of the second half of the show as I'm envisioning it.
Put a pin in that.
Yeah, put a pin in that, right. 41-page document. It outlines, the way that I read it, 3 general themes. The first and most important theme, which takes up about 10 pages of the report, is the exploitation, abuse, and sexual violence unleashed upon sex workers, prostituted women, in both sanctioned and unsanctioned forms, which will be interesting to talk about. But just to keep giving the rough overview, the second most important part of it is what the report leads off with, which is the excessive use of force, which focuses on three overall excesses. The first one being tasers. The second one, punches to the head. The third one, and the most interesting one to me, was the aggressive police dogs.
Dogs. Yeah.
And I remember when this was first coming out, we were both watching a Zoom call that the Department of Justice was holding with local community members, stakeholders, sort of explaining the report. And you texted me, 79% of all police dog bites are people of color.
Just a statistical
fact.
Anomaly, one statistical anomaly of many, I'm sure. Yeah.
Right. Which leads us into the third focus of the report, which is a clear pattern of racial discrimination in traffic stops, body searches, car searches, and arrests. And that is some of the most known stuff to people who follow this closely. It came as less of a surprise than anything else in the report, I would say. The most surprising, shocking, horrible part of the report were the stories of the exploitation and abuse of sex workers.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a little different for me, and I can share a little bit of my perspective and experience at some point. But I just I think it's important to say too that on the racist policing stuff, the Department of Justice basically said, you don't really even keep any of the right basic data that would help us determine if your policing is racist, and yet your policing is so racist, we were able to like overtly discover that anyway. I think it's like really important to note, like they don't even have most of the data they would need to make that determination, but it's so bad they were able to make the determination without the data. And there's a reason we don't collect that data, and I'll let you guess what it is.
Yeah, I take three guesses as to why we don't collect that data. And, in the days since, I just listened to the mayor on the radio program talk about how, the police is starting to collect that data. It's like, I'm not going to hold my breath, This is not an accident of like poor technological ability or just like having a difference of records keeping and management system than the Department of Justice. This is like intentional omissions that obscure the wider themes,
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about it more, but this is a prime document if you want to read about a police department that is rotten from the bottom to the top all the way through and has been for a very long time.
Right. And just to stick on the data for a second, because I have it right in front of me here, there's a chart in here on page 28, if anyone's sort of following along, WPD traffic stop outcomes. And wouldn't you know it, if you're Hispanic, 80% chance higher than if you're white of being arrested as the outcome of a traffic stop. If you're black, 62% higher than if you're white. Getting a criminal complaint, same dynamic, 65% more likely if you're Hispanic than if you're white, and black is 36% higher if you're black than if you're white. Citations, it's slightly higher for Hispanics than anywhere else. Warnings is the only thing that goes the other way. Warnings you are 20% more likely to get if you are white than if you are Hispanic or black. So that says a lot to me.
Yeah. And I don't have the numbers right in front of me. I'm sorry, I should, but
That's okay.
they talked about similar trends with other types of what we would call, minor offenses. So Bill has heard me talk many times about the package, but for anyone who hasn't, the package is what attorneys refer to disorderly conduct and disturbing the peace as. Those are the charges that they charge you with if they just like want to arrest you and like they need a reason. Those charges are much higher for people of color, as are trespass and open container violations. Significantly higher for people of color.
I actually have that. I'm looking at it right now. It's right in front of me. I'll back up what you're saying with some facts here. Disorderly conduct. If you're black, 2.48 times more likely to fetch that charge than if you are white. If you're Hispanic, you're 1.84 times as likely to catch that charge. Disturbing the peace is roughly the same. Resisting arrest is roughly the same. Trespassing is roughly the same. And opening container, roughly the same. These are all, you're right, the sort of minor offenses that keep the cops busy and keep our most vulnerable people sort of in and out of the court system.
Yeah. Also, if you've heard of broken windows theory, this is what it is. It's busting for people drinking. It's busting people for drinking on their porch and like loitering outside.
Right. I mean, when I went down to the city common a few weeks ago, I wrote about it in the newsletter, but I saw like an unhoused guy get arrested. And he got arrested basically for talking back to the cops. And he got hit with disorderly conduct and disturbing the peace, of course. And then also assault and battery on a police officer, which is not in the report, but would be very interesting to see who catches A and B on police officer charges. And the thing about this is these charges are almost always thrown out, right? Yep. I mean, that's your area of expertise.
Yeah. So what I would say is that in my prior line of work, I posted bail for poor people. Basically, is the easiest way to describe what I did. And it was almost always for charges just like this. And the dismissal rate that I have seen is close to half, 40 to 45% of the charges just eventually go away. So it's really just a way to lock you up for the night, tie your life up, make it miserable, make you have to go to court a bunch of times. So that's days you're not going to work or taking care of your kid or whatever it is you do. Money that it costs to do all of that stuff. And then, a lot of times it just goes away.
Yeah. And what that has the effect of taken in the whole is sort of like the manufacturing and preservation of an underclass that you can keep arresting to keep giving yourself something to do. And that applies to the prosecutors, that applies to the judges, to the prisons, to the jails, the entire thing. If the goal was to improve people's circumstances, we wouldn't be doing it this way.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. This isn't, you don't improve people's circumstances by throwing them in county for a few days or a few weeks, or a few months, and then like dragging their ass to court all the time and making them sit on a bench and, disrupting their lives. That's, and then maybe finding them some money. That's not what does it.
Right. Yeah. So you have there this sort of, the way that I like to think about it is that that's how an underclass that coerces every class above it into participating in society. That's how it's maintained, And then on top of this, you look at this data and you see that that is comprised by uh, inordinately high numbers of people of color.
Yeah, you wrote about this really well, Bill, and I'm not going to remember the framing exactly that you used, but you talked about who the who the police are for and like what the police are for, and the police are for oppressing and keeping under constant stress this class of people that you want to do that to, and having shot spotters all around them and having cameras all around them, so that the people who live in the neighborhoods that doesn't happen in don't have to deal with it. Like they don't want to be policed. They may say they do, but they don't want to be policed like this. I promise you.
Right.
But that's it is what creates that dividing line where those people don't have to be subject to or as affected by what's actually happening in the world, which is poverty and desperation.
Right. And then the people that are on the other side of the proverbial fence from the containment zones where this stuff is manufactured only ever sort of interact with law enforcement through propaganda, whether that be the overt propaganda of news programs and sort of like municipal ceremonies and the duty and honor and respect and most dangerous job, all of this stuff around the sort of Praetorian Guard imperial culture of your local police department. But it's also in media. Like it's like Law and Order SVU is the most effective propaganda. I'd love to do like an entire series on the propaganda elements of Law and Order SVU that make it so effective, because it offers a vision of the world where sex crimes in particular are something that the police solve. And that's just the opposite of reality. And we see no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, and it always, the other great thing, I mean, it's not for me. I can't stand the show, but I know people that, are politically cool, but still love it. And that's fine. But it's procedural, right? Like it also always goes the same way. They always get the bad guy in the end. They, and maybe even if they have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, they get there, and that's okay.
Right. It's like, in every person, every woman on the show that reports a sex crime gets some sort of recourse for it and is certainly not punished for the act of doing so.
They take it very seriously.
They take it very seriously, and they don't try to dissuade you from pressing charges ever. That couldn't be more opposite from the reality most people face when they try to go to the police department with something like this. And that is one of the realities that's detailed in this report. But more than that, and I think what's made this so visceral, shocking, and upsetting of a document for people who don't usually go out of their way to really think deeply about police stuff. It's like this document shows that not only are the police ineffectual and apathetic in the realm of sex crimes, they're also fucking just doing them themselves. Often.
They legitimately might be. I want to talk at some point about how often I strongly suspect and have some information that makes me strongly suspect that it's the same six guys. If you think about it that way, they might be the largest danger to sex workers in the city of Worcester. I think that is not hyperbole to say. Right.
And if you tie that back to the sort of thesis that I've been proposing on the way that an underclass is manufactured, this is the most extreme version of that. Because to add a feminist perspective on top of the class analysis, it's like policing um, policing the role of women is not just being like an indigent that needs to be constantly thrown through the court system, but also somebody who you need to abuse personally for your own satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
In ways that you wouldn't do to a man. So I think that that's kind of a good time to like get into the specifics of some of this stuff in that section. So I'm just going to pull it up here. The way the report reads, it goes first through the use of force stuff, which I think is like the most well-trod ground for people who are critical of the police departments or have encountered criticism, in their media diets. Use of force stuff is the most obvious, but in the sex crime stuff, I don't think people have really thought about how this stuff works.
Yeah, I think most normal people haven't. I'm counting myself as an abnormal person here for various reasons that I'll talk a little bit about. But yeah, no, I think that's right. And I haven't talked much with people about it. I'm not the right person to. I think I want to say right now, actually, is that Bill and I are acutely aware that we are two white guys talking about this subject. And we fully intend, you'll be hearing from some people that aren't us in a statement in this episode, but also in the future, hopefully like on the podcast. That is something we definitely want to work on when we're not putting things together on like a 72-hour lead time.
Right. And we will be branching out into interviews and such definitely in the coming weeks, but this is our second episode. We're still setting the tone.
Yeah, we're trying though. I promise. We are aware.
All necessary caveats aside, I think that we need to. Okay, so this is just something I've been encountering all week that's worth talking about before we talk about this stuff. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a certain amount of unproductive self-policing yourself out of even talking about this stuff that can happen, that ultimately serves the ends of the power structure that is allowing this stuff to be perpetuated. So I am personally okay with the consequences of my talking about this as frankly and as honestly as I can without self-censoring that much. So I'm going to put that out there in case somebody gets really mad at me. And then I'm just going to clip that and send it back to them. I really think that we need to develop a vocabulary that like conveys how fucking terrible this shit is.
I completely co-sign that, and will only just add that the way that you stop awful, brutal things from happening is not by not talking about them.
Right. Yeah, there's a certain amount of niceties that need to be dispensed with when the subject matter and what's at play here are just so like beyond the pale awful. So with that, let's get into it. This is section B, page 16. This title is WPD officers violate women's constitutional rights by engaging in sexual contact while undercover. So this is one of the three. This is the first of the three ways that the DOJ has assessed that there's a pattern of bad behavior going on in the police department. This one has to do mostly with undercover stings of sex workers, which is something that just flatly should not be happening in the first place. Like, why are we doing that in 2024 to begin with? Why are we prosecuting the prostituted women for the exploitations of the sex trade. That is just, it's unbelievable that we're even doing that we have a whole vice squad that is tasked with doing this stuff. But zooming back in, the thing that the DOJ takes issue with is the guys who go undercover to hit sex workers with prostitution charges, night walking or whatever it's called. I don't know what the charge is. I've read any number of strangely worded charges in the Massachusetts legal.
Typically, the two we would be dealing with here would be engaging in sex for a fee, and then the common nightwalker statute.
That's
which
the one.
I won't go off on that too much, but I just want to say what being a common nightwalker is in practice is you are someone who is allegedly known to engage in sex work, and you are in an area where sex work occurs. I'm going to talk a little more later about the very specific bounded area where so many of these arrests happen. But let me just say, people live in them, and people like walk their kids to school in them. And that can be a crime for them, actually, directly.
Right. And the bounded area is just so important to keep in mind for all of this, because this only happens in the part of the city where like the light does not frequently shine. I guess we'll just put it that way.
Yeah, let me put the bounds on it really quickly now while we're talking about it.
Sure.
I would say that the vast majority of the arrests, I have studied hundreds of reports written on arrests, like police reports written on arrests for for these two charges, and almost all of them occur in the area roughly between King Street and Claremont Street. They go a little outside of that on all sides, but we're talking about literally like what, 5 blocks, 6 blocks, something like that. A very, very small area.
Right. It would be well worth the time or money for a data person to do that records work and map out where these arrests happen, because I think that like the visual there really tells like a story that is almost impossible to describe with words, but it's like really like a containment zone and just like a farm for hitting people with these kind of charges to prove that you're doing something for the public safety, to feed the bureaucracy with crime. This is where you go. This is where you go to mine the crime that you then convert into data into the bureaucracy to prove that you are useful. When in reality, you're just making the situation worse the entire time. So after some blah, blah, blah legal language, they say unwanted sexual contact by an officer, from groping or fondling to penetration, shocks the conscious. It serves no legitimate governmental purpose. As I was just saying, sexual conduct by police officers may also violate the Fourth Amendment, which establishes the right to not be subjected to unreasonable searches and seizures. An officer touching someone's body can be a seizure, and there is no legitimate government interest in officers engaging in unwanted sexual contact. Sexual assault is unreasonable. They have to state here. They have to say it. Sexual assault is unreasonable.
We have to tell Worcester cops that they can't rape women on the job, apparently.
Yeah.
No one else has told them yet.
Right. So after, I'm not going to go through the rest of the legal argument. I think if you're not in agreement with us by now that this is wrong, perhaps another program is best for you. But we're going to go into a couple of examples now. The first example that they share, for example, one woman said that in or around 2021, an undercover officer touched her breasts and permitted her to touch his genitals before he arrested her. Another woman described an undercover officer asking her to touch his penis when she did before being arrested as part of a sting. So what's going on there is that these cops are undercover specifically to write tickets and arrest these women for what they're asking them to do, which is like on the face of it, it's just extremely predatory behavior to begin with. To be, I can't believe that we even do this at all. But to do that and also make them touch you is crazy, is absolutely unbelievable. And this is sanctioned policy, as we'll get to. This isn't even the stuff that's off the books. Like this is so another example, and then we'll move on to the next section because there's like 10 or 15 of these examples, and I don't think we should be reading all of them. But a second example is a different woman explained that WPD targeted and touched her over several years and arrested her multiple times during stings. This started in approximately 2016 after an undercover Worcester Police Department officer summoned a woman over to his car and asked if he could touch her. In response, she pulled down her top to expose her breast, and he asked her to pull her top down lower, asking, "Can I get some nipple?" That part is in quotes. Then he starts fondling her and twisting her nipple. Then he drove her to a different area where she was arrested. Approximately 2 years later, the same woman got into a car with another undercover officer. He exposed his penis and directed her to touch him for approximately 20 seconds. He then drove her to a different location, and she was again arrested. The officer arrested her again in a 2022 prostitution sting. So that's exactly what we were talking about earlier, about how in a small geographic zone, the same people are just routinely arrested and thrown through the system for the same stuff over and over and over again. And this particular sort of arrest comes with the added indignity of being molested in the process.
Yep. By the way, I just want to highlight one more thing before we move on from this section. There's also a part about how supervisors have been made aware of this for years and they've done nothing. That's not the part I want to hit, though. The part I want to hit is it describes in here how these charges have been essentially decriminalized since 2018. The DA's office is not prosecuting them. They're sending women to a diversion program for survivors of sexual exploitation. Without even comment on that, I just want to say we're talking about charges that have been essentially decriminalized. The DA's not charging them, and yet police are still raping women and arresting them on these charges for 6 years since this essential decriminalization happened.
Right. Knowing full well that the charges aren't going to stick.
Correct.
So, Chris, for what reason would you be doing that if you knew the arrests weren't going to stick?
Yeah. I guess I'm not the right person to answer that question because I really don't know. Except, interesting thing about sex crimes is there's often an element of power and power imbalance, and that might be something to think about. It's
certainly not the actions I can see of somebody who believes that they're making anybody safer.
I think it's really hard to make an argument that this is making anyone safer, like literally anyone.
Right. And this is what they do while they're on the clock.
And under investigation.
And under investigation, that's right. What they do off the clock, and this is the toughest part of the entire report. This is section C, page 20. The header being credible reports that WPD officers have sexually assaulted women under threat of arrest and engaged in other illegal sexual conduct raise serious concerns. We have heard multiple credible accounts that WPD officers have sexually assaulted women under threat of arrest, demanded sex acts in exchange for police assistance in violation of their constitutional rights, and engaged in other concerning sexual encounters. These assaults and other unlawful conduct raise serious concerns, particularly in light of the significant power imbalance between officers and the vulnerable women they have targeted. This section details stuff that sort of happens off the clock or off the books, but it doesn't always happen off the clock either. So I don't know. I'll just read the first example given here. One woman who was involved in the commercial sex trade recounted that a WPD officer sexually assaulted her in 2019 after pulling up in a rental car, announcing he was a police officer, flashing his gun, showing her a bag of drugs, and threatening to arrest her on a drug charge if she did not provide oral sex. That is, I mean, what is there to say about that besides that is an animal? You know, that is just a complete animal getting off on the power he knows he has. No.
Yeah, she quoted him as saying, "Relax. I'm here to do what you are here to do." And I want to mention this quickly for a reason, and that is that I think sometimes people wonder, and I used to wonder before I did the thing I always tell everyone else to do, took my own advice and talked to people in the sex trade. The thing I always wondered is, how is this like handful of guys constantly still catching these women? Like, how do they not know, like, don't get in the car with that fucking guy? I had a dream, I still do, of putting up a billboard in Maine South right at the intersection where this all happens with their faces on it and being like, don't get in a car with these guys. But here's the problem. It's right here. These guys are cops on duty, and then they're cops off duty. And it sounds like that activity is really intermingling. So like when the guy pulls up this time, is he a cop or is he a John? Is he a cop that's off duty but could still just arrest me on a drug charge and call? The lines get really messy, and that's how it's been described to me by people who are up against it. It's really hard to know what that guy is when he shows up, except that he can make your life hell if you don't do what he says to do.
Right. He has that added wrinkle of coercion that any other John doesn't have.
Yeah.
But is behaving like a John in any other way, except, and I want to read this next quote from another story where an officer forced a woman to perform oral sex on him and then gave her $40 and remarked that she was lucky to receive any money at all.
Yeah. I mean, cops don't pay for coffee. You think they pay for sex?
Right. And the entitlement to another person's body is something that is unique to a law enforcement official. I'm sure that there is, a whole body of feminist literature that I'm not aware of about that sort of basic idea, but the crass recognition of and indulgence in the power imbalance that betrayed in just that little sentiment of you're lucky that I gave you any money at all, like you exist for me and for my pleasure, is there's no training, there's no gender-based training that's going to fix that. You cannot reform your way out of that problem. I think personally.
I certainly agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. I don't know how you reform that. I don't know what training the cops use a bot to skip through and show that they did, which is another thing that is going on in Worcester right now.
Yep.
I don't know what one of those online trainings fixes that problem.
It just simply doesn't, and that's the most disappointing part of the DOJ report is what they recommend the city does. And then on top of that, even more disappointing is knowing that the city is going to resist even those completely innocuous, tepid things. But like I said at the top, really, you're doing a lot of ugly, monstrous people a favor when you focus on that. When you focus on, are the reforms good or are the reforms bad? You know, what reforms should we be doing? What reforms work? What reforms don't work? No, we need to be focusing on, he gave her $40 and remarked that she was lucky to receive any money at all. That it needs to be the focus. This shit happens every day. It happens every single day to the same small group of people, inflicted upon them by the same small group of people. And everyone knows who they are. Everyone close to the Worcester Police Department, everyone in the Worcester Police Department, they all know. They all know who's doing it. And they're just not saying. And they're not taking action to stop it because at the end of the day, they all are of the impression, reinforced by our entire society, that they need to maintain their status in a fraternal organization that sits above the rest of society. And to challenge the social order of that institution is to risk your own place in it. No one who even wants that job in the first place is going to do that, because you take that job to be in that club and you're motivated the entire time by what is going to keep you in and not get you kicked out. I mean, it's insane to the rhetoric after this from our city officials that is like, oh, well, if the DOJ is going to make all these crazy allegations, why don't they show us the reports? Why don't they bring names? Why don't they arrest these people? It's like, that is the police department's job.
Yeah.
And they know who it is.
Yes. Also, literally not the DOJ's job in this case, because this was explicitly a non-criminal investigation. That's what the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ is capable and empowered to do. And I have a lot of feelings about that, but let's just that is the reality, whether I like it or not, is that no one was getting cuffed at the end of this report process. That we knew from the beginning of it.
Right. So I want to just, because I'm heated up on this thought right now, but it reminded me of the way that the police unions framed this after the fact. And I want to jump to that now and just read a couple quotes from the police unions, keeping in mind what we just read, which we didn't even really get into that part of the report all that much, but I think that people have enough of a taste to understand what's happening here. The International Brotherhood of Police Officers, Local 504, said that it's just so insane to read this stuff after. The Justice Department investigators were, quote, extremely inaccurate in how they portray the police officials and police officers of the WPD. This summarized report creates a, quote, dark cloud over the WPD with the potential to destroy all the positive strides we have made with the community at large. And that's loaded, but I want to keep going on here. It also said, this is the police union statement also said that they heard. Oh, sorry. No, that was.
While you're finding it, a theme I'll say that I pulled out in their statements, especially I believe in the supervisors union statement, was that. The problem with these DOJ people and really the rest of us is what they're telling us is that we don't know what it's like to be a cop. We don't know about those hard, terrifying, life-threatening, split-second decisions they have to make, like pulling up on a woman and making her pull her top down. I can't imagine, the life-threatening split-second decision that officer had to make,
Right.
that led to that decision. But they really want us to believe that it had to have been the right one.
Right. I mean, like that, you got to make a really split-second decision there when you pull up on someone and you're like, okay, do I need to flash the bag of drugs, or can I get away without doing that this time and still get a blowjob? Do I need to go that far, or can I use a more sly and subtle form of coercion? Should I pay for it this time? Those are the split-second decisions that these police officers need to be making.
Was she lucky to get the $40, or wasn't she?
Right. So they're doing this thing, which is what I wanted to get to, where they're saying, quote, "The full report is needed and should be mandated," said the union in a letter, "to ensure the integrity of the investigatory process and allow police officers and officials to, quote, accurately determine the integrity of this investigatory process and allow WPD, its police officers and officials, to receive appropriate due process with the opportunity to debunk several severe allegations of misconduct, victim apathy, lack of appropriate training and policies." So when they're asking for the names of these people to be released, which is what the police union is doing, names of these people meaning the names of the officers accused in Section C of coercing, sex, and raping people. They want those officers named, they say, so that those officers can receive appropriate due process with the opportunity to debunk several severe allegations. The whole the whole game is rigged so that officers can get out of those situations.
Yes.
If they want to exonerate an officer who did any of the things described in the most garish section of the report, they can do that. And everyone will go along with it. And the way that they're going to do it is they're going to attack the credibility of the accuser. And
if you know the accused, then you know the accusers, or you can probably figure it out. By the way, I really love how data-driven they are now. They really need to see DOJ's data. No one needs to see their data.
No.
Remember that. That's why they don't collect it. That's why you and other journalists have had to jump through all kinds of hoops and sue them to get data. But yeah, they really need to see DOJ's data, though, immediately.
Right. And that, going back up to that first quote that I read, when they're talking about how this report, which in matter of fact language lays out various embarrassing and nightmarish things that they have done themselves, is going to jeopardize all the good work they've done to build up trust in the community. Saying what I do to the community is going to jeopardize the trust the community has in me. So that's your fault. I mean, there is something so sick and just like flipped around in the rhetoric and stated reasoning of like the police mindset, the cop brain, because it operates at the end of the day from the honestly accurate impression that they are a first-class citizen speaking down to second-class citizens. And that's not just, the underclass created by broken windows policing policies or the continued prosecution of sex crimes. That's literally everyone who's not a cop. There are cops and then everyone else. And they are speaking down to that.
Also, I think a thing that's safe to say in this city, from my experience, and I'm guessing yours, is that that's also not just the cops, right? That's City Hall. That's
Mm-hmm.
most of the city council. That's the city manager. That's the city solicitor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We are told implicitly and explicitly that we are not them. We're not as smart as them. We're not as good as them. And we don't deserve the same consideration that they do.
Right.
And those power structures and imbalances go hand in hand, and they support each other.
And you do have to wonder where the City Hall folks are getting that entitlement. Is it because they belong to a political culture that is insular and self-serving and has been that way for decades? Or is it because that insular, self-serving political culture is like attendant to and considers itself in some way part of law enforcement? Who controls who? And does your Kate Toomey or your Joe Petty act the way that he does because he thinks he deserves it, or because of their proximity to the police and how that allows them to feel? I mean, I'm not saying I'm right with that observation. I'm just saying it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, a way that I think about it is this: does Candy Merrill Carlson or Joe Petty or Kate Toomey get out of bed at 3 a.m. when someone calls because someone's overdosed behind the bus hub, or someone's complaining about sex work in their neighborhood? No. Someone calls the police, and then the police go. And then the police support, and then these people support those. Like it all goes together. They maintain each other's power structures, and this is the very clear and obvious result of when that happens.
Right. It honestly, like, not to be all woo woo or whatever, but it's like it's too accurate to the realities of colonialism. The basic geography of Worcester and every city is like indistinguishable from the like macro trends of first and third world. There is a first and a third world in every city, and there is a colonial exploitation that happens, but there's no resource extraction. It just maintains the social order. Like, you need, in order to have a Kate Toomey who holds herself as a Kate Toomey, and a police chief like Stephen Sargent, who has been in the police department for 35 years and thinks he can just go around drunk driving, never going to get in trouble. In order to have that, you need an underclass to reaffirm yourself against. You need to scare polite middle-class homeowners into thinking that they're going to get treated like that if you're not there, right?
Yeah, there needs to be an element of professed and widely publicized lawlessness for them to work against, while other kinds of lawlessness are routinely ignored. Or another way, I think, to the Ghetto Boys have a great song called "The World Is a Ghetto," and it talks a lot about this. People should listen to it.
Yeah.
They're probably smarter than we are.
No, for sure. But I think that's like when we're keeping in mind the way that our local political class is flailing and kicking and screaming and struggling to come up with a way to message on this that isn't so awful. That they're doing such a bad job, because this report, when you look at it the right way, comes way too close to comfort to like actually acknowledging that sort of myth of civilization on one side of Park Ave and barbarism on the other side of Park Ave.
Yeah, and also, what can you do? Um, what can you conclude from what could a reasonable person conclude from reading this report besides this is a thing that we should throw in the fucking trash and start over,
Right.
and that is gonna that's gonna involve a lot of their friends if it happens. So yeah,
They will not themselves do that. Anybody currently enmeshed in the prevailing power structure of the city will not take the steps necessary to reform this rotten culture because they benefit from it. They like that it's there. And they don't, at the end of the day, want to change it. And they don't see the people that this is happening to as human beings. And like, I say that in a very objective sense. I am not even that they're consciously evil. It's just that when you listen, like if you carefully listen to the way that like the mayor talks about this publicly, which I did earlier this afternoon, the victims here don't even come up rhetorically.
yeah,
They don't even come, they aren't even, he doesn't mention them. He says the allegations are serious, and he says, you know, if there was wrongdoing committed, we need to seriously investigate that, and nobody wants to have someone like that on the force. He does not for 1 second mention any of the people that were abused, and that is probably not. He's not some genius. That's probably not a conscious thing. That is just because they do not come up in his mind. And I think that is like something to keep in mind when you hear people talk about this. Do they mention the women who are being exploited in these stories? Or do they just talk about the bad apples? I'll put it that way.
yeah,
And
yeah. And I mean, I know we're going to talk about some other parts too, but yeah, how are they helping to restore justice and you know for any of these people, for the sexual assault victims and rape victims, for the people who get their fucking heads bashed in or bit by dogs, for the people who get their property seized and, you know, get hemmed up in illegal unconstitutional drug raids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. So before I want to read the statement that Project Priceless put out, because everyone's been putting out their statements this week. We've been getting statements left and right. A lot of them are goofy. A lot of them are terrible. Project Priceless, which is a group of unhoused women, self-organized, many of whom are involved in the commercial sex trade, got together and agreed on the statement to put out that has a list of demands. And it's really good. It's challenging stuff. It's but to contextualize that, I think we really should read the worst story in this entire report in my opinion, because this just shows how the depth of just the lack of humanity here. So another woman reported that in 2015, when she was just 19 years old, a Worcester Police Department officer forced her to have sex with him. The young woman, who was homeless, had become involved in the commercial sex trade at the same time as another young woman. She recounted that an officer used to taunt the pair from his patrol car. He asked if she was a, quote, good girl or a, quote, bad girl. After a couple of weeks, the officer summoned her over to his unmarked car. Knowing that he was an officer, she told us she remembered telling her friend that she did not want to go over to the officer's car because she thought it was a sting and she would get arrested. Her friend told her that she should go over to the officer's car if she knew what was good for her. When she did, the officer took her for a ride. He told her that if she did not have sex with him, he would make her life difficult on the street, and that he knew she had never been arrested, and it could stay that way. He took her to a local cemetery and forced her to perform oral sex in the front seat. He then moved her to the back seat, where he vaginally penetrated her. Unfortunately, however, this was not the last time she would encounter the officer. She told us that this officer picked her up and made her provide sex 2 to 3 times a month until she was arrested by the Worcester Police Department on an unrelated matter. That is that's a woman who got pimped out by a guy who wasn't paying her. That is sex slavery. That is literally what it is. Flatly, it's sex slavery.
What else can you call it? I mean,
what else can you call it? And just the kicker on that story, that this was going to go on in perpetuity until this woman was picked up by another Worcester police officer on some unrelated matter. The entire time, she was homeless, and her friend told her that she would go in the car if she knew it was good for her. Like she did, and her friend was probably right. She did not have a way out of the situation at all until she got arrested.
Yeah, no, her only way out was through. And by the way, he knew she'd never been arrested, and it could stay that way.
And it could stay that way.
But what do you know? It didn't.
What do you know? So I think that that's the appropriate sort of feeling to sit with when going to the Project Priceless statement. And I'll read the first paragraph of it. Project Priceless writes, "The initial reactions of Project Priceless to the DOJ report were a mix of disgust, disappointment, and a grim acknowledgement that these findings, while jarring, confirm what we have long known about the systemic abuse of prostituted women by those in power. We are outraged but not surprised by the depth of misogyny and violence revealed. Most importantly, we see this as a critical opportunity to unite all women in Worcester on the feminist front against rape, exploitation, and male violence. This moment demands collective action to dismantle the systems that perpetuate all these abuses and to demand justice and liberation for all women. The recent Department of Justice findings on the systemic violations of women's constitutional rights by the WPD are an urgent indictment of the system of male dominance and patriarchal violence that govern our city, our nation, and indeed the world. These findings, which detail the coercion of prostituted women into sexual acts under threat of arrest, and the broader neglect and abuse of our rights, make it clear that this is not merely a local issue. It is part of a global feminist struggle for liberation from subjugation, a struggle in which homeless women are emerging as leaders in the advancement of feminism in the first world, fighting for justice against the overlapping oppressions of sex, class, and state power. I can't think of a better way to sum up this report than how this statement does. This is a document, this is a testament to, this is just a small local example of a global problem. Homeless women are the people who most experience the overlapping oppressions of sex, class, and state power. If I know you haven't been arrested, and we can keep it that way, you know. Going on, prostituted women are at the nexus of the global sex class struggle. Their oppression is not incidental but systemic, rooted in the economic and patriarchal structures that treat women's bodies as commodities. Homeless women are preyed on by the industry of prostitution out of economic desperation, only to find themselves further dehumanized by criminalization and abuse. The revelations about the Worcester Police Department demonstrate that state agents who should protect the vulnerable are instead using their authority to perpetuate and deepen the exploitation of destitute women. They are paid with public taxpayer money to rape women. This is not simply a failure of policy, a few bad apples, or so-called gender bias. It is a reflection of entrenched male entitlement and state section violence that prioritize power over justice. It goes on and on from there. I'll put it in the show notes. But they make 5 demands, and those are worth going through. But Chris, I'll just ask if you have any thoughts on that first before I get into the demands.
I mean, what can I even say that didn't already say better, except just to highlight what it says, or a major thing that it says, which is that this is not the symptom of a broken system. This is the symptom of the system working exactly the way it is intended to work, which includes the subjugation and oppression and abuse of vulnerable people, a major class of which worldwide is vulnerable women.
Right. It's a feature, not a bug.
It's not a bug.
And I just to underscore that point, the DOJ presented this investigation as the first DOJ pattern and practice investigation into the general territory of sex crimes. What's happening in this report, what's outlined in this report, is certainly not unique to Worcester. Like most things, Worcester is an unremarkable city. If this is happening in Worcester, it is happening everywhere. Like Project Priceless says, it's a local example of a global issue.
Yeah, and I suspect, as in lots of cases, most certainly with the reporting, or I should say, the underreporting of crimes of a sexual nature, it is a very incomplete picture, right? We have some really shocking examples in this, and we also know that for every one of these we know about, there's a lot that we don't, like a lot.
There's a lot of unindicted co-conspirators here who probably read this report with anticipation of whether their story was going to be in it. And they were probably a little bit relieved that their story wasn't in it. But they were also sure as shit resolved to do everything they could to make sure that their comrade whose story was in it is not going to go down for it. And that's the present reality that we're dealing with. It's just under the surface of all of these statements that fucks like Katie Merrill Carlson and Joe Petty are making. It is just right there under the surface that they're going to go to bat for these guys, and they don't give a fuck what they do.
Yep. They are very stupid, and they are very careless based on what we can see in this report with their criminal activities, but they are also very disciplined, and they're very organized, and so we should remember that in our response to it.
They are confident, resolutely sure that they cannot be held to account. And the only thing that bothers them about this report is the attempt to hold them to account for the sort of crime that they expect to be off the table and outside the realm of public scrutiny.
And they're going to have to fucking talk about it, and they're going to have to get yelled at about it. And that's, for the vast majority of them, potentially all of them, that's the worst that's going to happen.
Right.
But that's too much.
That's an indignity that they're made to suffer because they're entitled to these women's bodies. They believe that. So I want to read these 5 demands because they're at once reasonable and surely won't happen. Which is the making of a good demand, I think. Outdoor cats rule. Number 1.
Yes.
Make your demands conceptually reasonable and sure to not be agreeable to the to the institutions of power. Number 1, acknowledge and apologize. Conceptually reasonable, sure not to happen. They write, publicly acknowledge the harm caused by the Worcester Police Department and issue a formal apology to the women affected. Like I said, Mayor Joe Petty can't even bring himself to say that there were women that were abused. Words alone will not suffice, but they are a necessary step in admitting systemic failure. Number 2 is empower the worker of Project Priceless. Again, reasonable and sure to not be acted on. Great demand. We are currently organizing outside in the cold. We are in dire need of a building to both shelter homeless women and to securely organize and store the material aid we distribute to the homeless. Knowing what we know about the vulnerabilities of women to exploitation and abuse, there is no one better to run a female-exclusive shelter than us. We are collecting financial and material donations in general. Number 3 is provide reparations. Allocate financial reparations and mental health support to women harmed by these systemic abuses. Reparations is not charity, it is justice. That concept even getting said out loud in the city council chamber is unlikely. But it is entirely reasonable, just, and owed. And the question becomes, why wouldn't that make it to the city council? And in pulling the threads of that question, you will learn a lot about how power actually works in the city, making that a good fucking demand. Number 4, criminalize the exploiters. This one seems like a no-brainer. But again, start pulling on that thread. Why aren't these 6 guys, as you said earlier, going to go to jail? But Project Priceless writes, the abuse of any women is a crime against all women. Prosecute men who buy sex and commodify and sell women. Put their names on a list like you have a list of women charged with sexual conduct for a fee. Give them a scarlet letter just like ours. Damn if that isn't a good campaign slogan for the weeks ahead. Give them a scarlet letter just like ours. Seriously. And then number 5 is commit to abolition. Recognize prostitution as a form of systemic exploitation and commit to its abolition. This requires creating pathways out of prostitution by addressing the structural inequalities that force women into it: poverty, homelessness, and the lack of viable economic alternatives. According to the DOJ, women have not been prosecuted for selling sex in Worcester since 2018. This should be the precedent going forward to ensure women are no longer criminalized for what happens to us. The only 2 organizations in the city taking care of this class of women are both politically struggling to abolish prostitution. We suggest you listen to us if you care about women. The struggle for decriminalization of sex work in Massachusetts is led by a meth-dealing child rapist. Good luck on that front.
Yeah. I mean, it's white hot fire.
Yeah. I don't know what the last sentence is referring to, but I gotta follow up on that.
I'm also not sure. I'm not saying things I know. I actually don't know.
But no, we should have somebody from this organization on if they'll come on. So I will be
Yeah.
sending that email. And
I'm so impressed with the work that they do, and I'm so impressed with the way that they frame the work that they do, because that's really hard to do in a way where you say what you really need, honestly and openly. And yeah, that's what you want to do. These demands are fucking great for all the, for the reasons that you described, and because it's asking for what people who are affected by this are saying they really need. It's not asking for half of it or a quarter of it and then getting 5% of it. That's a terrible negotiating strategy. Everyone should know that. And I don't know why organizations like this and people who are affected by these like horrific situations are expected to do that. You shouldn't do that. It's a terrible way to negotiate. Ask for what you want. Ask for more than what you want and try to get what you want. That's how you bargain. And they're bargaining the right way. The results that they will get from it, I think, will be not what they're looking for, but it's not because they didn't ask for the right things.
Right. It's not because they Democrat brained themselves into being
correct
Republicans before they even started being Democrats. Outdoor
it's
cats.
Not because they. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I was gonna. It's not because they asked for a mediocre civilian review board and got a really shitty one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is what the city manager is asking for, by the way.
Right. And that's like a cool little rhetorical slip that you made right there, that he's asking for it when he's the city manager, right? Who is he asking? Who is he asking?
Yeah.
Who is he asking? But no, Project Priceless demonstrating outdoor cats rule. Number one, make your demands morally reasonable and impossible for the present power structure to enact. That is how you make a good demand. Don't
ask for what the fuck you want.
Ask for what the fuck you want and put them in a position to have to explain why, with some clarity, they won't do it. So I think that that's sort of I think that we should let Project Priceless lead on this, and their demands are our demands. And I already signed on to this statement, but I will happily co-sign all 5 of these things. I think all 5 of these things should happen, and I'd like to see all 5 of these things advocated for. And I'd like to see all 5 of these things reach the city council floor, putting the people in power in the city, ostensibly, allegedly, in a position to explain why they won't do them. They should be made to explain why they won't do the things that this group of unhoused women is asking them to do.
And if you think, if you are listening to this and you're thinking about writing the council, calling the council, speaking at a council meeting on this topic, I urge you to really think about whether you should center what it is that you feel about it, or whether you should center what it is that the people most affected by this feel about it. And I'd really encourage you to consider the second and make your demands the demands of the people who have been suffering directly in this situation.
Right. And what's easier than an apology? What's easier than demand number 1? What's easier than an apology to these women?
Great place to start.
Great place to start. The thing that would be more hurtful and harmful to the present power structure than any new training regime or reform or counseling, any reform that could be enacted, regardless of the cost, it would be more costly to them to apologize. And that's important to understand. And I think that in asking them to apologize and seeing how they just simply won't, it is illuminating. And it'll help a lot more people see these people in power for who they are. And that is the most important thing that we can be doing right now, because we need, frankly, a mass awakening, like a consciousness awakening before anything is going to happen, and we are so far away from that. So doing something like asking a police department to apologize for raping unhoused women, and watching them wriggle and squirm out of doing that is something that could possibly awaken some consciousnesses. Potentially. Yeah. But I think that is probably a good place to leave it for today. There's obviously a lot more in this report, and we could talk about this for 3 hours, 4 hours. We didn't really even get to the third part of the sex crime section, which is about how the WPD can't or won't investigate sexual abuse allegations.
Or the other parts of the report, or the overarching theme that supervisors don't care and don't give a shit and never have, and sign off on everything, or lots of other things. But yeah, we're not going to subject you all to a 3-hour podcast. We're just not going to do that.
Let's call this part 1 of the DOJ files. And
I don't think this is the last time we're going to have this conversation. Unfortunately,
no. And actually, I was talking to a good friend of mine who's involved in activism around this issue, and she was talking to me about how overwhelming and deflating it feels right now to try to get the people in power in the city to take this shit seriously. And I had to say, I'm feeling the same way. That I don't know what to do to make this not go the way that I know it's going to fucking go. Right. And it's exhausting and infuriating and deflating. But
it's go ahead.
We have to recognize, I think, that there's something unique about this report. And I think I've tried my hardest to identify what that is in this episode. There is something unique about this report that presents it's a better wedge than we've had in the past to actually force a hand here. So I think that if you're feeling like I am, which probably a lot of the people who are listening to this are going to probably agree, the important thing is to just keep the temperature turned up, keep the heat on, and not be concerned with the end goal or whether what becomes of it. Because if the hopeful thing that there's something unique about this moment plays out, it's only going to play out if we allow it to, and that people, the way we allow it to happen is if people keep their foot on the gas and keep pressing for more on this, and don't let the issue disappear. Yeah.
And I mean, I want to be clear. I think probably people who are listening to this have some sense of this, but they are going to use every political power maneuver they have to make this go away. They already started doing it in the last council meeting when councilors who wanted to address motions were not allowed to do that. When the question came up about, someone in the city knew about this on Friday and city council didn't know about it till Monday. There's so much, like I mean, there's just too much here to do at once. But the thing I guess I'll say to kind of conclude is understand and be prepared for the fact that they are going to use every fucking political maneuver they have, holding items, reframing the issue, depersonalizing and dehumanizing the victims of these crimes, manufacturing consent with everything that they possibly have. They're going to use all of these things, and we have to be prepared to be as vigilant and disciplined and organized as we possibly can, if we want to see anything happen, or even if we just want to see these people squirm for as long as possible, which, man, I know I sure fucking do. Let's and you know, I know people have thoughts about like political discourse and civility and things like that, and I don't share all of them that people have, but I just want to say, if you're talking to people in power, people who can do something about this, and they won't, they're being rape apologists, and you should maybe think about calling them that.
Yeah. All right. That's a great note to leave it on. We'll put the link to the report itself and Project Price's statement in the show description, and we will be back next week, and we will almost certainly be talking about the same shit next week, and hopefully with a guest. I'm gonna do my best to arrange that, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and it's, it'll be the week before Christmas, so maybe we'll find a little goofy thing to talk. Maybe we'll give you a little dessert after your vegetables.
Right, that's true. We should have really thought about some dessert, but no,
this was all vegetables, and that's okay.
Yeah, this is the 100% vegetable episode. But thank you guys for listening, and do let me know if you like what we're doing here. I'm having a good time.
Yeah, same.
All right, see you next week, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.